So Art obviously laid it out pretty well, but in the wake of these extreme events and firestorms, the game has changed as far as what's needed, and local government's challenged with the way things are set up to be able to quickly and effectively respond. And so Bill has had some amazing success in Marin. So you can see all these yeses, these are important areas to get to yes in different aspects of code. And he seemed to have helped crack the nut somehow in Marin. So we're hoping to hear a little bit from you, Bill, about what have been some lessons you learned to be able to work within the policy framework and do more innovative things, and what might others learn from you?
Okay. Yes, well, in Marin we tried to solve a very different problem. I think Art has put it in the global context here, which is very helpful. But what we were trying to find in Marin was how we could allow the green building community to gain permits to build sustainably. And our strategy for doing this was to look and see really what the laws said and what the codes and standards said. So we looked in the health and safety code and identified that there were actually multiple areas in the California Health and Safety Code that would allow us to do local adoptions of provisions that the legislature had already put in place, one of which was limited density owner-built rural dwellings. In our local adoption of that, which, by the way, relaxes the California state building codes, right? All we did was to frame that local adoption of it very, very broadly to allow for innovators who wanted to build their own dwellings to be able to do so. Another one of these was the joint living and work quarters, which is also in the Health and Safety Code. We adopted a straw bale residential structure provision out of the Health and Safety Code, and then we rescinded it after this state code included provisions for straw bale. And the one that I hear most about is our adoption of a designation to construct, alter, expand, or preserve architecturally significant structures or features. And this is kind of tied to the state historic building code and the intent around that. We expanded on that to include, in the context of architecturally significant, to include existing or future structures that had present or future local importance to the history, architecture, or culture of an area by our own duly appointed architectural commission. And I can read for you, which may be helpful to help you get your head around how we view architectural significance, which, I would say that, if you want to build something like what Art has illustrated up here, that could definitely be a candidate for architectural significance. As we've defined architectural significance in our local adoption, it is the term used to describe the basis by which the attributes of a structure, site, or design should be preserved or encouraged. Now try to get your head around this. Architectural significance, when determined by the commission, and again, the commission is appointed by the governing body, is an attribute associated with present or proposed structures and or specific features of present or proposed structures deemed by the commission to have present or future local importance to the history, architecture, well-being, or culture of an area. And this is within our communities. Historical significance is certainly a criterion when applicable. However, it is not the only criteria examined by the commissioners. Factors such as the use of alternative construction, design, materials, and methods that protect the environment, stimulate the economic viability of sustainable construction, aid affordability of construction practices, increase participation in consumer protection through lawful construction activity, enhance owner equity in the improvement of property, and or contribute to the well-being of the community are weighed with equal consideration by the commissioners when determining if architectural significance exists. So now my point is that the state codes do not say anything about this. However, through the powers of local government, we did. So I guess my message to you would be, work with your local government toward identifying really what your needs are in local government and rising to the occasion, because I believe you can.
Great, thank you. And so, we've all heard the local or the problem that we're faced with, and you committed advocates in various aspects of sustainability. And it'd be great to hear from you of, what do you feel you can do, sort of a short version of the answer, to take action, or potentially if there's a barrier to action and then a need. So actions, barriers, and needs in that realm, either of those. Kathy, would you like to start off?
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so I'm coming from the perspective of a planning commissioner, but I'm also a landscape architect and I work on design teams, just as a member of the public and a property owner. Yes, my name is Kathy Nolan. I'm Renee. I'm trying to think where to start with this, but as a planning commissioner, I've been a part of a sustainability committee and some other chairing other committees for the city, and then also just being observant of who comes to the podium, members of the public, and the projects that come through us. And in lieu of the recent Thomas fire, for instance, the city of Ojai fortunately did not lose a single structure, but the surrounding unincorporated area of Ventura County did, as did the city of Ventura, which is just adjacent to us. So after the fire, we had people that didn't actually live in the city limits, some of them coming to the city and saying, what are we going to do? We need housing. In addition to that, the city is always looking for ways to get affordable housing to meet our arena numbers. And we've been looking at 80 years. So that said, I'm in favor of, and I would like to see our city look to Marin and to Bill Kelley to possibly use his ordinance as a template of how we may adopt using alternate building materials, and probably starting with the cob, and then hopefully in the future something else, moving on. But using that as a way for, number one, to have more fire-resistant structures for new, like say, ADUs going in, and then possibly even for new properties that are in the wildland urban interface, so they're in the high fire or very high fire zones. The other thing I also want to mention, it's kind of along the same line, but it kind of gets into water and other things that are maybe not in the code or that are not maybe promoted or that people are not educated about. For instance, when I first joined the Planning Commission in 2010, I worked on the Modified Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. It was a mandate through the state. And in the guidelines, it said they recommended gray water use at the time. And knowing our situation in Ojai, that we do not have state water, we were in a drought, I was encouraging and asking through all different avenues of the city, should we incentivize or have an ordinance that plumbing for gray water be required? Well, here it is so many years later, and that is in the code, but a lot of people don't know it, and it's not being incentivized. So it's things like that. It's not just new things that we can get in the code that aren't in there, but other things that are there existing that aren't being used or taken advantage of that are sustainable. I'm just throwing it out that I think municipalities, cities, counties, what have you, should look at ways, if possible, to get funding to incentivize, somehow to encourage people to start taking advantage of and using those ordinances or codes to create a more sustainable environment.
Great, thank you. Larry, did you want to?
I'm Larry Fay, Environmental Health Director, Santa Barbara County. I've had a lot of opportunity to think about working with guys like Hart, who are always coming with the prepared schemes that bring into your office and say, hey, how about this? as regulators, as government officials, I think Bill will testify, and I'm sure your experience is the same. We're inherently conservative when it comes to innovation, because we spend a whole lot of time pondering what will go wrong. I mean, that's really where we are. We're looking at these things and imagining the worst case scenario, and if we can imagine it, we know it'll happen at some point or another. When it comes to working in the public health world, I feel a double concern about assuring the things we put in place aren't going to jeopardize public health on down the road. But that said, in many of our codes, there's almost always a provision in there that goes something to the effect, or as otherwise determined by the local official. And most of my colleagues seem to gloss over that section. But I've looked at that and tried to talk to my staff. You know, that's really opportunity. That's the place where we get to apply the principle, so to speak. And we can actually put the gray matter to work and look at the problem, look at the proposed solution, see if it's actually going to address the issue and not create other unanticipated problems. So, and the question, what could we do? I don't have a specific thing we can do in terms of jumping on sustainable permitting other than moving away from the prescriptive code and getting the training, getting the education, some of the other areas where you feel comfortable in making decisions that don't fit down the checklist approach. It's a lot easier to do that when you're talking about an individual decision, because if we're wrong, the consequences of that error are confined to that property and the person who proposed it. And I think getting some of that experience that enables you then to broaden that exception, so to speak, to where it becomes something that's more of the norm. I think some of the gray water things that we're dealing with now are becoming much more acceptable and normalized than they would have been 10 or 20 years ago. I'm really excited about what I'm seeing here, and in particular, the integrated kind of design, looking at the whole system as we start redeveloping. I just see huge opportunity for us to rebuild resilient communities, but we have to be ready to accept that our historic practices are convenient. We have a whole industry that's built around those. There's a lot of interest in place to continue doing what we're doing. But those of us that are in the role of issuing permits and things just need to be prepared to embrace those harebrained ideas with open arms, evaluate them, tweak them, and then move on.
Good afternoon, Doss Williams, Santa Barbara County Supervisor. I'm honored to be here. I especially try to say yes to any speaking engagement in Ojai because I'm racked with guilt that I no longer represent you in the state legislature. So I try to come out here, especially a lot of family, including our Vice Mayor sitting right in the back, Susan Francina, my aunt. I guess I would put out some advice from the perspective of having served both at a local level and a state level. That first of all, I understand there's some state regulators in the room, so I'm going to put that out there. What Larry's talking about, moving away from prescriptive codes and moving to performance-based measures, performance-based expectations in statute and in regulations. I think that's really crucial, and I would argue that if this is an arena where usually the code updates are not supposed to be overly messed with by the legislature from kind of an understanding that's out there, but I will tell you that there is an interest in the part of the legislature to engage and on the part of a lot of individual legislators to engage on this issue. And so particularly if you are a regulator or can get your agency to push something that you think is a good idea. While we have a lot of talent in this room, it's easier for a legislator to say yes to an agency's request to mess with the codes than it is to take, Art Ludwig, mad scientist of sustainability's request, right? It's just there. So I want to embolden you if you're listening to this and you represent an agency and you want to. So you sometimes feel like your job shackles you to what lane, to staying in your lane. Don't stay in your lane. I think there is an interest out there in these matters in the part of our lawmakers. Secondly would be my advice for fellow local government folks. First of all, I think we need to have a willingness to engage at a pretty detailed level. A lot of this stuff is pretty arcane. We're a bunch of generalists, and we can do some things pretty well, but it takes us a decent amount of engagement to even get to maybe the first step or the second step on these matters. I would also say that a willingness to enlist practitioners in concrete asks. I mean, I'll tell you the most useful slide I've ever seen in all these was just that ask list, because I guess this is leading into advice for activists and practitioners. Is usually the request that we get at government is so general it's pretty hard to implement, and that a request like, well, let's legalize sustainability. I'm like, whoa, that's big. What's the steps? And this slide already has been incredibly useful. And I guess the other piece of advice, both for decision makers and activists, especially those of you from Santa Barbara County or other jurisdictions that, like us, usually believe that we're on the cutting edge just because we're Santa Barbara. And it's so not true, okay? Except maybe in public health. But I mean, in most matters, it's so not true. One of the biggest ones is, we're the self-proclaimed birthplace of environmentalism, but utility scale solar is still, unpermittable, illegal in most of Santa Barbara County except for Cuyama. So we have a lot of ground that we need to cover, and we need to be willing to go, hey, we're not ahead of the game, we're behind the game, and have some urgency about it.
Want to keep that, Bill? Art is going to forego his time. He whispered in my ear a question for you to talk about pre-approved plans.
Well, I can say about pre-approved plans that local governments have the ability right now, without any special magic, to pre-approve plans. There's nothing preventing local government from doing that, right? So that then raises the next question, well, how do we get plans to get pre-approved? Where do you come up with the plans, right? Now, if you're asking local government to go out and design pre-approved plans, well, that's maybe a little bit different because, your governing body may say, well, that's not really our job, right? But if you bring us plans that you think really have merit for pre-approval, then we can see to it that the steps are put into place to do all the necessary reviews and so forth to get the plans to a point where, if they are in fact general enough in application, that they could be pre-approved. And having said that, local government also has the ability to create separate building permitting programs, if you will, to differentiate your normal building permitting program for normal kinds of building permitting activity that we see every day from these kinds of special projects which go through a special process or a special program. Local government has that ability. to do that. As a matter of fact, the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma have done exactly that with regard to the fire rebuild for the fire damage that was up there. They just separated that out entirely from their normal building permitting programs, and they outsource that to qualified individuals to run those. So the ability exists.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. Art, did you want to kick off the wrap-up rounds?
Yeah, I think thinking in terms of action is the way to go. And for my part, I will continue to bring plans to local governments that are nearly but not impossible to approve, pushing them almost to the breaking point in the direction that they most need to go, and also advocate strongly for the adoption of these kind of measures that we see up here on the screen in the pre-approved plans.
Nice. And yeah, thinking in terms of what is a step? It's research. I also love, Das, that you called out, bring us concrete plans, not big generalizations. So it could be an ask or a step for the audience too. But just, final thoughts for you. What's an action you want to take away from this to move things forward? Do you want to grab it first?
An action that I would take away from this? Okay, well, so I am aware that COB is being proposed as an appendix of the 2019 model building code, which would be the California building code, coming from the ICC model code into California being adopted and so forth, and then going into effect in California in January 1 of 2020. I'm aware that that is being proposed. However, it's not a given. So I think about that in the context of where we are today, and I recognize there is nothing stopping me from putting together a local COB code adoption ordinance for my governing body, if in fact my governing body wanted to move in that direction, and I will certainly have that conversation with members of my governing body. But my point is, if I can do that, then so can you, right? So there's nothing for you don't have to wait for the ICC to say, yeah, COB's good enough to put in the code, so we'll put it in the code, and then for California to adopt it. If you have a COB code that you think is the right code for building with COB and you want to move forward with it, simply develop your own local ordinance to adopt a COB code. Now, somebody may ask the question, well, what about, that isn't in the state code, and so that you can't do that, right? I would argue, no, that's not correct. Because if the state code is silent, bingo.
In this case, the only.
Yeah. And in time, if COB does appear within the California Building Standards Code, well, then your local ordinance would then become null and void, right? But until that time, you do not have to wait for the state to do something. You can step up and do it yourself because the state code is silent on it. It's not preventing you.
Great, thank you, Bill. Larry, would you like to go?
And I think to Bill's point, it's about the process. And we have, I think, a lot of opportunity locally to do things, but you have to engage in that kind of process, understand what it is. Again, the problem that you're addressing, which proposed solution is, how that's going to fit in, and then go through the code process of adopting it locally. And some of that means targeting the people that are going to be receptive to innovation and new ideas, because it's a pretty heavy lift to go through the whole ordinance process. And I also know about this from making the decisions. I know Bill and I have done a lot of code stuff, and the work of assembling it all. You want to make sure that there's actually an audience for it as well. Some of it's driven by the demand and interest of the local folks. From my standpoint, the thing that I'll take home and the thing that I can do, because a lot of what public health is dealing with is around the edges of this bigger issue. But it's always understanding the work we do in the context of that bigger picture. There are objectives that are maybe bigger societal objectives that we need to understand and appreciate. So when I look at the specific things that are in my regulations or in my practice, I can challenge myself and my own staff as to whether this is really the only way to slice this up. Is there another way to get there and still retain the assurance that we're providing an acceptable level of public health protection at the same time to do it? I think there are a lot of opportunities if we are open to it and express that willingness. And I have found that our boards frequently are receptive to that if it's well thought out and there's rationale behind it.
All right, well, adding on to what our panelists just discussed, and then also what was mentioned earlier in the previous panels and presenters this morning, everyone talked about collaboration, and the one thing I would like to put out there is could call it a commission or a committee or a board be formed in different communities where you're bringing in the building inspector or building department, possibly planning, if planning was involved. Could be planning commission, we have a building appeals board in the city of Ojai, for instance, and then also the builders, the innovators, and the designers. So you're essentially forming this commission that could actually work as a think tank on something that isn't in the code yet and kind of work on that. And then that being said, pilot projects could even happen. So you're essentially testing something out ahead of time, do it once, do it twice, 5 times, 10 times, whatever they felt was enough to gather enough data, and then eventually, hopefully, it would roll over and get into the actual code. So those would be the two things that I would share and recommend.
Well, I would just talk about from the step-by-step political process perspective that I would, number one, I think a lot of times people believe that city council members and board of supervisors just sort of do it alone. You come in, ask for something, and we wave our magic wand, and it becomes law. And that's not how it works. It's the staff has an enormous amount of influence because you're relying on staff to execute the will of the elected body. And so when you're going to your council, and by the way, having a planning commissioner go with you is an excellent idea if you've tried to get this stuff done. If you're going to your city council or board of supervisors, concurrently, I would meet with staff. I would try to meet with staff, get some guidance of what they think of your ask list is doable. I would prioritize that in your communications with the elected body. Because ultimately, those are the folks who are going to either execute what you're advocating for, if it's approved by the elected body, or frustrate what you're advocating for, right? And so enlisting their aid is vital in this process, and it's not easy because building officials, their virtue is being a hard ass, right? We rely on these folks for people not to die, right? And so it is, I'm not saying it's an easy process. We've been through some rough processes in Ventura County on this. Since that, Ventura County's got a lot better. So I do think there's hope, but execute.
Great, thank you. I'd just like to give a big hand for.
I was just going to add one
Thing, and if you're worried about whether some of these buildings are insurable, I have the silver lining of the gray cloud. Increasingly in these disaster areas, and most of the loss of buildings in Santa Barbara County, or my district, none of them are becoming insurable, right? So we might as well have them more affordable and sustainable to build because insurance companies are pulling out of a lot of these places entirely, and homeowners are having to go to the surplus market, which is very, very expensive. So don't be afraid of that as an excuse because we're already there with conventional materials.
Thank you. Big hand for Art for doing the work and this panel. And just to call you all to action, if you have any little lever to pull on this issue, I think Larry touched on it, of, you know, we all have our jobs to do, whether as an activist or regulator, or, you know, elected official, staff, senior staff, whatever position we're in, and we really need to hold that the house is perpetually on fire now, and not to burn out our adrenals and our relations and our lives in a perpetual race to the stove, right? We can't do that, we can't sustain that way. We have to be able to get present and stay present with what this moment is calling of us, and that there's never been a time where actions have mattered more, and to get our electeds there, and to get the staff there, and get, you know, like we all been talking about all day, get all of us there together at the table to think together. And so I just want to call for each of you, what's your step on this conversation, or it could be another conversation, to you know, pontificate good things, and like, all right, I'm going to call this person, or I'm going to research this issue, or, you know, Kathy's setting that meeting with the right players, because that commission idea sounds amazing.